Morning came softly, like a secret the world was not ready to tell. The first touch of light slid over the hills, quiet and slow, spilling across the rooftops of our village until it reached the temple walls. I could hear the bells even before I opened my eyes, their deep, steady rhythm rising through the mist, calling me to begin again. Every day started this way. The same sound. The same steps. The same purpose. I rose from my mat before the others stirred. The stone beneath my feet was cold, but I had long learned not to notice. I tied my robe, gathered the brass bowl filled with rose petals and rice, and stepped into the narrow corridor that led to the shrine of Devi Vasarna, the goddess I had served since I was old enough to walk. The temple stood like an ancient mountain of stone and silence. Every wall was carved with stories of gods and demons, victories and punishments. Oil lamps flickered along the paths, their flames trembling against the breath of morning wind. The air carried the scent of sandalwood and burnt incense, sweet at first, then heavy, as if the smell itself held 1,000 unspoken prayers. They all said I was chosen. From the day I was born, my family believed the goddess had claimed me as her attendant. "You were born to serve," my mother would say, touching my forehead with pride. My father would smile quietly, his faith wrapped around me like a chain I could not see. I wanted to make them proud, so I never questioned the words. I remember kneeling before the goddess that morning. Her image towered above me, carved from black granite, her painted eyes wide and still. I placed the petals at her feet, arranged them carefully so none overlapped. Then I lit the lamp and watched the flame catch, small but alive, dancing in the dim light. I whispered the prayers I had memorized since childhood, words that rolled off my tongue without thought or feeling. "Devi Vasarna," I said softly, "I accept this offering. Bless this day. Keep me pure." My voice echoed through the empty hall, and for a moment I imagined the goddess listening. But the idol remained silent, her face calm, unmoving, cold. I told myself the silence was sacred. Yet something inside me wondered if she could hear me at all. I shook the thought away. Questions were dangerous. Doubt was a sin. I kept my focus on the rituals, the flowers, the flame, the bell. Everything had a rule, a rhythm, a meaning. And I was proud of how well I followed them. By the time the villagers arrived, the temple was alive with sound. Feet shuffled. Prayers rose. Children clung to their mother's saris as offerings were laid before the goddess. Fruits, coins, garlands, milk. I guided them gently, just as the elders had taught me. To them, I was the goddess's chosen child, the one who carried their prayers to the divine. They bowed before me with respect, but when I looked into their eyes, I saw something that unsettled me. Fear. A quiet, familiar fear, the same kind that lived in me. Fear of punishment. Fear of being unseen. Fear that their love might never be enough. A small boy came forward, his hands trembling as he carried a clay pot of milk. I smiled to calm him, but before he could reach the altar, his foot slipped. The milk spilled, spreading across the floor like a pale river. Gasps filled the hall. The boy froze, his eyes wide. "Will the goddess be angry?" he asked me in a whisper. For a heartbeat, I looked up at the idol. The goddess stared back, the same unchanging expression, eyes painted in red and gold. I didn't know what she felt. I didn't even know if she could feel. My throat tightened, but I smiled at the boy and said quietly, "A no. She will understand." Those words left my mouth before I could think. I wasn't sure I believed them. Yet when I said them, something small inside me stirred, like a single spark in the dark. It wasn't fear. It wasn't my duty. It was something softer, something that felt alive. When the boy smiled again, I realized that his relief brought me more peace than all my prayers combined. The temple bells rang again, louder, brighter. The people bowed low. I joined them, pressing my forehead to the stone floor, repeating the ancient verses. But as I did, a single ray of sunlight slipped through the temple window and touched my face. It was warm, gentle, unlike the cold stone beneath me. I opened my eyes slightly, and the light seemed to follow me, resting on my skin as if it had chosen me. That moment stayed with me. Even now, I can remember how it felt, the warmth, the stillness, the strange quiet that wrapped around my heart. I didn't know it then, but that was the first time I felt something different. Something not born of ritual or duty. It was as if someone, unseen, unheard, was calling me. I remember thinking, why does this light touch me, and not the goddess? I pushed the thought away again, ashamed. But no matter how much incense I burned or how many prayers I whispered, that question followed me. That morning ended like all the others, with offerings, chants, and the weight of tradition pressing softly on my shoulders. Yet something had changed. I didn't understand it, but I felt it, deep inside, where even prayer could not reach. I didn't know it then, but heaven had already begun to whisper my name. When the morning prayers ended and the temple doors closed, the rhythm of village life began again. The sound of pounding grain, women drawing water, children laughing, and the bleating of goats filled the dusty air. My village, Keshapo, was small, no more than a cluster of mud houses surrounded by rice fields and tall coconut trees. From the highest temple step, I could see the whole of it spread beneath me like a woven mat of colors and motion. To most, it was home. To me, it was both comfortable and a cage. I walked the familiar path toward my house, the earth warm beneath my feet. Women greeted me with folded hands, calling me a Davy's child. I smiled politely, lowering my gaze. Their words always made me uneasy. I was honored, yes, but the praise felt heavier than it should. I wasn't a goddess. I was only a girl, tired, curious, and quietly hungry for something I didn't yet understand. Our home stood at the edge of the village, built from sun-dried bricks and roofed with dried palm leaves. The air inside was thick with the scent of turmeric, smoke, and the faint sweetness of boiled rice. My mother, Meenakshi, was already up, her bangles clinking as she stirred the morning meal. She was graceful even in her weariness, her eyes carrying both warmth and worry. Life had not been kind to her, yet she met each day with quiet strength. "Did you finish the morning offering?" she asked as I entered, her voice calm but alert. "Yes, Amar," I said, setting down my empty bowl. "The flowers were fresh today." She smiled faintly. "Then the goddess will be pleased." I nodded, but inside, I wondered how anyone could know what pleased a stone. My father, Raghavan, sat by the doorway, sharpening his sickle. His hands were rough, his face carved by years of work in the fields. He looked up briefly as I entered. "Good," he said. "A pure heart brings blessing to the home." His words were praise, yet they carried weight. In his eyes, my service to the temple was our family's highest honor. My faith was not only mine, it was the pride of our lineage. To falter would mean bringing shame upon us all. After breakfast, I joined my mother at the well. The path wound past the banyan tree where elders gathered each morning, discussing harvests, marriages, and village disputes. I could hear their laughter mixing with the cries of street vendors. Beyond them, children chased one another barefoot, their laughter echoing through the narrow lanes. Life here was simple, predictable, bound to the same cycle of days that never truly changed. Yet, as I filled the water pots, my eyes drifted toward the far end of the street, where strangers sometimes passed through. Traders, travelers, and sometimes teachers. My father warned me never to speak to outsiders. They bring confusion, he said. But I often wondered what stories they carried, what lands they came from, what gods they prayed to. The days in Keshapur were ruled by the temple. Every festival, every celebrat. The days in the temple were measured not by the sun or the moon, but by the rituals that filled them. Morning after morning, I rose before the first rooster's cry, long before the village awoke. My feet knew the path by heart, from my doorway, across the courtyard, past the old neem tree, and through the stone arch that led into the sacred grounds. Every step was a duty, every breath a prayer. I used to think that devotion meant never growing tired. But as the years passed, the rituals began to weigh on me, like garlands that looked beautiful from afar but grew heavier the longer they rested on my shoulders. The temple floors were always cold when I arrived. I would kneel to scrub them clean, my hands raw from the rough stone. Then I would polish the brass lamps until they gleamed, refill them with oil, and light each one carefully. There were 57 lamps in the inner shrine, and every flame had to burn evenly. One dim light was a sign of disrespect. I made sure none ever faltered. Then came the flowers, baskets upon baskets of jasmine, marigold, and rose. I would sort them by color, weave them into garlands, and drape them around the idol. The goddess's granite face watched as I worked, her eyes painted with vermilion, her lips curved into a smile that never changed. They told me she was alive. They said she saw all, heard all, and blessed those who served her with pure hearts. And yet, every time I looked at her, I saw only silence. When the priests arrived, the chanting began, long, heavy verses that rose and fell like waves. I had memorized every word, every sound. My voice joined theirs, steady and sure, but inside, I felt nothing. It was as if I were reciting lines from a play whose meaning I had forgotten. During one ceremony, I remember watching a woman come forward with her newborn child. The baby was sick, its tiny body trembling. The mother's eyes were swollen from crying. She placed the baby at the feet of the idol and begged, "Mother Vasarna, please heal my son. I have no one else." Her voice broke as she wept. The priests waved lamps and chanted louder. I kept my head bowed, but my heart ached. When the ritual ended, the woman left the temple, carrying her still weak child. No miracle followed. I wanted to run after her, to say something, but what could I say? That the goddess would answer? That her prayers had been heard? Even I wasn't sure anymore. That night, I couldn't sleep. The sound of the woman's cries echoed in my mind. I thought of all the times I had bowed before the idol, all the hours I had spent cleaning, decorating, and offering gifts, and yet I had never once felt seen. My duties grew heavier with each passing week. Festivals brought crowds that filled the temple courtyard, and my hands never rested. I helped prepare the offerings, coconuts, fruits, ghee, and gold. The smoke from the incense choked the air, clinging to my skin until it felt like I was made of it. Sometimes, as I stood there, I imagined that I too was an offering, a living sacrifice to a god I did not understand. I remember one afternoon clearly. The heat was unbearable. I had been fasting for a festival, and my strength was fading. Still, I carried the trays of oil lamps to the altar. As I bent to place one before the idol, my hand trembled, and a few drops of hot oil spilled onto my wrist. The pain shot through me, but I didn't cry out. I told myself it was a test of faith. I whispered, "Endure it, Anaya. The goddess sees your devotion. But even as I said it, I felt an emptiness inside me that words could not hide. Later that evening, when the rituals ended, I went behind the temple to fetch water. That was when I noticed a small rat scurrying near the idol's platform. It nibbled at the rice grains that had been offered to the goddess earlier. I froze. The sight disturbed me. If the goddess was truly divine, why did she allow her offerings to be eaten by a rat? Why did she not protect the food that was meant for her? The thought unsettled me, and I pushed it away quickly, whispering another prayer to silence my own heart. But the question stayed, echoing in the back of my mind. I told myself not to think too much. Faith, after all, was about obedience, not understanding. Yet, the more I served, the more I longed for something deeper than ritual, something that touched the soul instead of merely pleasing the eyes. One evening, when the temple was empty and the sun dipped low beyond the trees, I sat alone before the idol. The light from the oil lamps flickered across the stone walls. The shadows danced like restless spirits. I folded my hands and began to pray, but my lips faltered halfway through. The words felt dry. My throat tightened, and before I knew it, tears spilled down my cheeks. "I've done everything you've asked," I whispered. "I've obeyed. I've served. I've given you all I have. But why do I still feel so far away?" My voice broke in the stillness. I waited, hoping for an answer, a sign, a sound, a stirring of the air. But the temple remained silent, the goddess unmoving. The only sound was the crackle of the lamps. That silence was heavier than any ritual I had ever performed. I rose slowly, wiping my tears before anyone could see. I told myself it was foolish to cry, that faith was not about feeling, but about discipline. And yet, as I walked out into the cool night, a strange thought brushed through my mind like a whisper carried by the wind. Perhaps the true God is not one who demands, but one who gives. I did not understand those words, nor did I know where they came from. But they stayed with me, haunting and tender, like the echo of a song I had once known in another life. From that day, every ritual felt heavier, not because I believed less, but because I began to sense that there was something more. Something beyond the smoke and stone, waiting quietly for me to see it. I still served, still smiled, still followed every rule. But in the quiet corners of my heart, a question had been born. And once a question is born, no amount of chanting can silence it. Days turned into weeks, and yet the questions that had quietly crept into my mind refused to leave. They lingered like the faint smell of incense long after the lamps had been extinguished. Every morning, as I swept the temple floor, I found myself wondering why the silence around me felt so hollow. The chants, once sacred, began to sound like echoes bouncing off empty walls. The idols, once majestic, now seemed distant and cold. I tried to drown my doubts in devotion. I worked harder, prayed longer, and fasted more often. The priests praised my discipline, and the villagers spoke of me as an example of pure faith. But inside, I was unraveling. There was a quiet ache in my chest that grew deeper with every ritual I performed, as if my spirit was reaching for something it could not find. One morning, I arrived at the temple before dawn. The air was cool, the sky still pale with the promise of sunrise. As I prepared the offerings, I caught sight of my reflection in a brass vessel filled with water. My face looked tired, older somehow. My eyes, once bright with zeal, now carried the weight of questions I dared not speak aloud. I leaned closer and whispered to my reflection, Who are you serving, Anaya? And why?" For a moment, the silence seemed to listen. Then the bells from the outer courtyard rang, calling me back to duty. I wiped my tears and went on with the day. That afternoon, as I sat under the banyan tree near the temple gate, an old man approached me. He was a traveler, dusty from the road, carrying only a wooden staff and a small cloth bundle. He greeted me with a kind smile and asked for water. I hurried to fetch some from the pot nearby. As he drank, he looked at me intently and said, "You serve the gods with great care, child. But does your heart find peace in what you do?" His question startled me. It was as though he had seen through the walls I had built around my soul. "Peace?" I repeated softly, unsure how to answer. He nodded, still smiling. "Yes, peace. The kind that rests within, even when the world is loud." I didn't know what to say. I wanted to tell him that I felt only exhaustion, that despite my faith, peace had always stayed just beyond my reach. But instead, I bowed politely and said, "The goddess provides all things, including peace." The old man studied me for a moment, his eyes filled with something I couldn't name, not pity, but a kind of gentle sorrow. Then he said quietly, "The gods of stone do not hear, my child. But there is one who does." Before I could ask what he meant, he thanked me and walked away, his figure fading into the golden dust of the road. His words stayed behind, echoing through my heart, "There is one who hears." That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay on my mat, staring at the ceiling, replaying the old man's words over and over. Who was this one? I had grown up believing that all gods were many faces of the same divine. But his tone carried a certainty I had never felt before, as if he spoke not of belief, but of relationship. The next day, during a ritual, my hands trembled. As I offered flowers before the idol, my gaze lifted toward its unchanging face. I whispered, Do you hear me? Do you know me?" My voice was barely a breath, lost beneath the chants of the priests. Still, I waited for something, a sign, a movement, anything. Nothing came. And yet, deep within, something stirred, not from outside, but from within me. A faint thought, quiet and warm, brushed through my mind. You are seen. I froze, unsure if it was my imagination. My heart beat faster. For the rest of the day, I couldn't shake the feeling that someone was near, watching not with eyes of stone, but with compassion. The following evening, as the sun melted into the horizon, I found myself walking beyond the village, toward the riverbank where the water reflected the colors of the dying day. I sat on a rock and let my feet touch the cool water. For the first time in a long while, I allowed my thoughts to wander freely. What if the old man was right? I whispered to the river. What if there is someone beyond all this, someone who hears, someone who knows? A gentle breeze swept over the water, rustling the reeds beside me. I closed my eyes and let it wash over my face. There was a calmness in that moment, unlike anything I had ever felt inside the temple walls. It wasn't the solemn stillness of ritual. It was alive, soft, and strangely comforting. That night, I dreamed. I stood inside the temple, the lamps burning as usual. But this time, the idols were gone. In their place stood a great light, not blinding, but warm and pure. I heard a voice, tender yet strong, calling my name. Anaya. The sound filled me with a peace so deep that I began to weep. When I woke, my pillow was wet with tears. I tried to dismiss the dream as imagination. But the feeling it left behind, that quiet, living peace, refused to fade. The next morning, as I stepped into the temple once more, everything looked the same, yet nothing felt the same. The chants, the bells, the offerings, they all seemed distant, almost hollow compared to the voice that had called my name in the dream. I began to look at the idols differently. I saw their still faces, their painted eyes, their unmoving hands, and for the first time, I realized that they could not see, could not hear, could not touch. The truth was both terrifying and freeing. I no longer knew where my fate stood. I only knew that my heart was restless, reaching for something real, something that could speak back. It was the beginning of a journey I could not yet understand, a journey that would soon lead me away from the temple, away from everything I had known, and into the arms of a truth that would change me forever. The rains came early that year. The clouds gathered like an army across the horizon, heavy and grey, pressing down upon the village. I remember that day vividly, the air thick with the scent of wet earth, the wind restless, whispering through the palm leaves as if carrying secrets I was not meant to hear. The temple courtyard, once filled with the songs of worship, now lay empty, its lamps extinguished by the rising storm. That morning, the head priest had declared a special ceremony to appease the goddess. The rains, he said, were a sign of her displeasure. We must pray harder, he warned, his voice echoing through the stone hall. Our devotion must rise above the thunder. I helped prepare the offerings as usual, coconuts, rice, ghee, and garlands of jasmine. But my hands moved without feeling. My mind wandered to the dream I'd had, the one where a light called my name. It had been weeks since then, yet the memory burned in me like an ember that refused to die. As the ceremony began, the storm outside grew louder. Lightning flashed through the temple windows, and the thunder rolled so fiercely that it made the stone floor tremble. The priests continued chanting, their voices rising above the roar. I tried to focus on the words, but each clap of thunder seemed to speak a language of its own, one that my soul understood more deeply than any ritual verse. Suddenly, the wind burst through the temple doors, scattering petals and extinguishing some of the lamps. The head priest shouted for the doors to be closed, but before anyone could move, a loud crack split the air. A bolt of lightning struck the neem tree just outside. The sound was deafening. For a brief second, everything went white. When the light faded, the idol before us had fallen. The garlands lay broken at its feet, the face of the goddess cracked across the forehead. A gasp ran through the priests. One of them cried out, a sign of wrath, and hurried to lift the statue. But I couldn't move. My legs felt rooted to the ground. My eyes stayed fixed on the broken idol. Something inside me shifted in that moment. I heard again the words of the old traveler, "The gods of stone do not hear." And now, as I looked at the shattered face of the idol, those words came alive. The goddess had not fallen in anger. She had simply fallen, silent, helpless, unable to save even herself. The storm outside raged on, but the true storm was within me. My heart pounded as though trying to break free from the chains that had bound it for so long. I turned and ran from the temple, out into the rain. The priests called after me, but their voices were lost in the thunder. The rain drenched me as I ran across the courtyard and into the open fields. The world around me blurred, the trees, the earth, the sky, all lost in a whirl of wind and water. I didn't know where I was going. I only knew I needed to escape. My feet carried me to the riverbank, the same place where I had once sat in quiet questioning. But tonight, the river was wild, swollen, and furious. I fell to my knees in the mud, my hands trembling. The rain beat against my face as I lifted my eyes to the dark sky and cried out, Who are you? If you are real, if you are the one who hears, show me. I can't keep serving what is dead. Please, show me. My voice broke with desperation. The storm answered with another crash of thunder, and for a moment, I thought the heavens themselves had split apart. Then, amid the roar of the rain, something happened. It was as if time paused. The air around me changed, softer, warmer. The darkness no longer felt heavy, but full of light I couldn't see yet somehow knew was there. I closed my eyes, and in that darkness, I saw it, a vision, clearer than any dream. I stood once again in the temple, but this time there were no idols, no priests, no lamps. Only light. A radiant, living light that filled the entire space, flowing like water, gentle yet powerful. In that light stood a figure. A man, clothed in white, his face kind and radiant. His eyes met mine, and in that single moment, every fear, every doubt, every burden I had carried seemed to melt away. He didn't speak at first. He simply looked at me, and in his gaze, I felt known. Not judged, not condemned, but deeply, completely known. My heart trembled as tears streamed down my face. Then he spoke, and his voice was like music, soft yet commanding, filled with a love that felt both ancient and new. Anaya, he said, calling me by name. I have seen your tears. I have heard your prayers. You have sought truth with an honest heart, and I am the truth you seek. My knees gave way beneath me. Who are you? I whispered, though in my spirit, I already knew. I am the one who was, who is, and who will be, he said. I am the living God. You no longer need to serve what cannot hear or speak. I am with you. Then he stretched out his hand toward me, and the light around him grew even brighter, so bright that I had to shield my eyes. The warmth of it wrapped around me like an embrace. In that instant, I felt something break, like invisible chains snapping free. Every fear, every guilt, every emptiness inside me vanished. In its place came peace, pure, overwhelming peace. When I opened my eyes, I was back by the river. The rain had softened to a drizzle. The storm clouds were parting, and a single beam of moonlight broke through, falling upon the water. I sat there, drenched and trembling, but my heart was still. I knew, deep within, that I had seen the truth. The voice, the light, the peace that no ritual had ever given me, it was real. He was real. I whispered into the night, Jesus. The name felt strange on my tongue, yet it carried power, like a key turning in a lock I hadn't known existed. My tears flowed freely, not from sorrow, but from release. That night, under the fading storm, I made a silent vow. I would never return to the idols again. The gods of stone had fallen, but I had found the living God, the one who heard my cry in the storm and answered with love. And for the first time in my life, I was free. After that night by the river, nothing in my world looked the same. The sun rose as it always did, the roosters crowed, the villagers went about their morning chores, but I felt as though I had stepped into another life. My body moved through familiar paths, but my spirit had crossed a line I could never return from. I had seen something beyond the temple walls, beyond the reach of every chant and incense offering. I had encountered someone. I needed to understand his voice. The next morning, I went in search of those men. It took 2 days before I found one of them again, a kind-faced man with gentle eyes who sold herbs near the edge of the market. I approached him timidly. "Sir," I said, "you spoke of a man named Jesus. I wish to know who he is." He looked at me long and hard, as though measuring the weight of my words. Then he motioned for me to follow him to a quiet place behind his stall. There, beneath the shade of a tree, he unwrapped the small book. Its pages were old and delicate, written in a language I could barely read, but his voice filled in the words. He began to tell me a story, not of a distant God, but of a man who walked among people. A man who healed the sick, fed the hungry, and forgave those who were lost. A man who called himself the Son of God, not a God of gold or stone, but of spirit and truth. His name was Jesus. As he spoke, I felt my heart tremble. Every word struck something deep inside me, as if each syllable was unlocking a door I had kept closed for years. I asked him, why did he die, if he was so full of power and love? The man's eyes softened. He died because of love, he said quietly. He took upon himself the pain and sins of the world, so that all who believe in him may live free. But death could not hold him. He rose again. I could barely breathe. The thought was too vast, too beautiful. He rose again? I whispered. Yes, the man said, his smile gentle. And he lives even now. He is not an idol that must be carried. He carries us. Tears filled my eyes. For the first time, the longing in my soul found its answer. The one who spoke to me in the storm, the one whose voice had called my name, it was him. It had always been him. The man handed me a small piece of paper torn from the back of the book. On it were words written in our language. He said they were from the Holy Scripture. Come to me, all who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest. I clutched that paper to my chest as though it were life itself. Those words echoed through me, I will give you rest. That was what my heart had been searching for all these years, through all the fasting, the offerings, the sleepless nights of ritual. Rest. For weeks, I met the man in secret. Each evening after my temple duties ended, I would sneak away to the same spot under the banyan tree where he would read to me from the book. I learned about Jesus' kindness, his miracles, his forgiveness even to those who crucified him. I learned that he called himself the light of the world, and I thought of the vision I had seen, that living light that filled the temple. My soul knew it was the same. But as I learned, fear also grew. The priests would never understand. If anyone found out, they would cast me out from the temple, perhaps even from the village. Yet I couldn't turn back. Every page of that book felt alive, every word whispering truth that no ritual could silence. One night, I asked the man, if I believe in him, what must I do? He smiled gently. You must speak to him. Not through incense or offerings, but with your heart. Tell him that you believe he is the Son of the living God. Tell him that you trust him to lead you. That night, I went home and knelt beside the small lamp in my room. The flame flickered softly as I closed my eyes and spoke aloud for the first time, not to a statue, not to the silence of stone, but to the living Jesus who had found me. I don't know how to pray, I whispered, but you know my heart. I believe you are real. I believe you came for me. Forgive me for all the times I worshipped what I could not see or hear. Teach me to know you. Show me how to live for you. As soon as the words left my lips, an incredible peace washed over me, the same warmth I had felt by the river that stormy night. It was as if invisible arms wrapped around me, and a soft voice whispered, "You are mine." I wept. Not in sorrow, but in joy, because I knew then that I had found what I had been searching for all my life. From that night on, I no longer feared the silence of the temple. For even when surrounded by idols, I knew the true God lived not in stone, but within me. My search for answers had ended, but my journey of faith had just begun. The peace I had found in my heart was unlike anything I had ever known, yet the world around me did not share in it. In fact, it was that very peace that began to draw attention. The priests noticed it first, the way I no longer chanted with the same fervor, the way my hands trembled when I placed offerings before the idols, the way my eyes seemed distant during the morning rituals. They began to whisper among themselves. I could feel their suspicion like a shadow following me everywhere I went. One afternoon, the head priest called me aside. His face, once stern but calm, now carried a trace of anger. "Anaya," he said, "your devotion has faltered. The goddess knows when her servant's heart grows cold. What has changed?" For a moment, I couldn't speak. I wanted to tell him everything, about the storm, the vision, the voice that had called my name, but I knew he would never understand. So I bowed my head and said softly, "I have been unwell, Father. My strength is not what it was." He studied me for a long moment, his eyes narrowing. "The goddess will not be mocked," he said sharply. "If your faith has weakened, you must cleanse yourself. You will fast for 7 days and spend the nights in prayer before the altar. Only then will your spirit be restored." I nodded obediently, though my heart ached. I knew I could not return to the same prayers I once believed in. My heart no longer belonged there. But I agreed, for fear of revealing the truth too soon. That night, as I sat before the idol, I prayed not to the stone figure before me, but to Jesus, the living God who had found me in my darkness. I whispered, "Give me strength. They cannot see you, but I know you are near." The following days grew tense. The priests began to watch me closely, and the villagers whispered behind my back. They said I had angered the goddess, that my misfortune would bring bad luck to the village. Children who once smiled at me now ran past in silence. My friends avoided my eyes. Then one evening, something happened that shattered the fragile peace I had tried to maintain. During the evening ceremony, I was lighting the lamps when one of the priest's assistants entered the inner sanctum without warning. He saw me kneeling, not before the idol, but facing the opposite direction, my hands clasped, my eyes closed, whispering the name of Jesus. He froze, staring at me in shock. "What are you doing?" he demanded. I turned, startled, my heart pounding. "I was praying," I said softly. "To whom?" he snapped. My silence was enough of an answer. He ran out, shouting for the others. Within minutes, the head priest and 2 elders stormed in, their faces burning with fury. "You dare bring another god into this sacred place?" the head priest thundered. "I only pray to the true God," I said quietly, trembling but firm. "The one who hears and lives." A heavy silence fell over the room. Then came his voice again, cold and sharp as a blade. "Blasphemy!" They dragged me out into the courtyard. The rain had just begun to fall again, soft, steady drops that mingled with the tears on my face. The priests gathered the villagers and accused me before them all. "This girl has betrayed the goddess. She prays to a foreign god and defiles the sanctum." Gasps rippled through the crowd. Some women covered their mouths in shock, others spat at the ground in disgust. A few men shouted for me to be cast out. My mother stood near the back, her eyes wide with disbelief and sorrow. She didn't speak. The head priest turned to me. "You will kneel before the goddess now and beg for forgiveness," he ordered. "Renounce this false god, and perhaps she will spare you." My body trembled, but my heart stood still, anchored by the peace I had found in him. Slowly, I shook my head. "I cannot," I said. "I cannot bow to what is not alive. I have found the one who gives life, and I cannot deny him." A murmur ran through the crowd. The head priest's face twisted in rage. "Then you are no longer a daughter of this temple," he spat. "You are cursed. From this day, you shall not touch the offerings or step foot on this ground again." He tore the red thread from my wrist, the mark of a temple servant, and threw it to the ground. The villagers recoiled as if I were diseased. My mother began to weep. They ordered me to leave the village by dawn. That night, I sat outside my home, staring at the flickering flame of my oil lamp. I could hear the distant thunder rolling once more, and though fear pressed against my heart, I remembered the storm where I had first heard his voice. He had found me once in the rain. I knew he would not abandon me now. I packed a small cloth bag with nothing but a shawl, a loaf of bread, and the torn paper that bore his promise, "I will give you rest." I pressed it to my chest and whispered, "You are my rest, Lord. Even if I lose everything, I will not lose you." When morning came, I walked out of the village barefoot. No one came to see me off except my mother. She didn't speak. She only pressed her hand against mine and whispered through tears, "And may your God protect you." I smiled through my sorrow and said, "He already has." As I walked into the rising light of dawn, I felt the weight of rejection, yes, but also an overwhelming freedom. The chains that had once bound me to fear and ritual had been broken. The world before me was unknown, but I was no longer alone. For the first time, I was walking not toward a temple made by hands, but toward a living faith written upon my heart. And though the road ahead would test me in ways I could not yet imagine, I knew one thing with unshakable certainty: I would rather walk into exile with Jesus than remain in comfort without him. The road stretched endlessly before me, a narrow, uneven path that wound through rice fields and over low hills, shimmering under the pale morning sun. I had never traveled so far from my village before. Every step felt uncertain, yet something deep within me urged me forward, a quiet assurance that I was not walking alone. For 2 days, I wandered between small hamlets, stopping at wells to drink and sleeping under trees when night fell. The few villagers I met gave me curious glances. My clothes were simple, my feet dusty and sore, and I carried no sign of where I belonged. In their eyes, I was a wanderer, perhaps even cursed. But in my heart, I was searching for something greater than belonging. I was searching for him. By the 3rd evening, I reached the edge of a small town. The faint sound of singing floated through the air, soft, melodic, and unlike any chant I had ever heard. Drawn by the sound, I followed it until I reached a humble building made of clay walls and a thatched roof. A small wooden cross hung above the doorway. Inside, a few people sat on woven mats, singing with closed eyes and lifted hands. Their voices carried peace. I stood by the doorway, afraid to step in. I didn't know what to say or how to begin. Then an elderly woman noticed me. She had kind eyes and a face lined with wisdom. She motioned for me to come inside. "Child," as she said gently, "you can sit here. You are welcome." I hesitated, then stepped in. The moment I crossed the threshold, a strange warmth filled me, not from the fire that flickered in the corner, but from something deeper, something that felt alive. When the singing ended, a man stood up to speak. He wasn't dressed like a priest or guru. He wore simple clothes, and his voice carried no authority except love. He opened a small, worn book, the same kind of book I had once seen in the hands of the traveler who spoke of Jesus long ago. He began to read softly. "Come to me, all you who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest." Those words struck through me like light breaking into darkness. I pressed my hand over my heart. I had seen those same words written on the torn piece of paper I carried everywhere. My eyes filled with tears. It was as if the Lord himself was reminding me that he had not forgotten his promise. After the gathering, the man approached me. "You are new here," he said kindly. "What is your name?" "My name is Anaya," I whispered. I was once a temple attendant." He did not flinch or look shocked. Instead, he smiled gently. Then you have known devotion, he said, but now you will know love. We sat under a neem tree outside the small church, and for the first time, I told someone my story. The temple, the rituals, the storm, the vision, and the persecution that had driven me away. The more I spoke, the lighter I felt, as if I was releasing years of burden with every word. He listened patiently, never interrupting, only nodding with understanding. When I finished, he said softly, "What you experienced was not a dream, Anaya. It was a calling. Jesus reached into your life because he saw your heart, the way you sought truth even in the darkness. You did not find him by accident. He found you by love." Tears streamed down my face. I had longed to hear those words, to know that what I had felt in that storm was real. He opened the Bible again and read from the Gospel of John, "I am the light of the world. Whoever follows me will not walk in darkness but will have the light of life." At that moment, something inside me broke, not in pain, but in release. The weight of years of fear, guilt, and duty melted away. I fell to my knees and whispered through my tears, "Then I will follow him. I will follow the one who gave me light." The man placed his hand on my shoulder and prayed softly, asking Jesus to fill me with his spirit, to make me new. As he prayed, I felt a warmth that seemed to come from within, not from the sun or the wind, but from a deep, living presence that wrapped around me like gentle arms. My heart, which had once been bound by rituals and rules, now pulsed with freedom. I didn't see visions this time. I didn't need to. His presence was enough. The peace that came was stronger than any miracle, quiet, certain, unshakable. When I opened my eyes, the man smiled. "You are now his," he said softly. "No longer a servant of stone, but a daughter of the living God." That night, I stayed with a small group of believers. We sat around a simple meal, rice, lentils, and bread. We prayed before eating, not to idols, but to a living Savior. Their faces glowed with joy that no ritual could ever create. And as I looked around, I realized I had found what my heart had been yearning for all along, not a place, not a temple, but a family bound by faith and love. As the moonlight filtered through the small window, I clutched my shawl and whispered, "A thank you, Jesus. I once served gods who could not hear, but you heard me. I once bowed before a stone, but you lifted me up. I once was lost, but now I am yours." And that night, for the first time in my life, I slept without fear. The days that followed felt like waking up to a new dawn every morning. The weight that had once pressed on my chest was gone, replaced by a calm I could neither explain nor contain. For the first time in my life, I felt alive, truly alive. I no longer lived under the constant fear of offending a god or forgetting a ritual. Instead, I lived with a deep awareness that I was loved, not for my perfection, but for simply being his. Each morning, before the sun rose, I would step outside and sit beneath the neem tree behind the small church. The air would still be cool, filled with the scent of wet earth and jasmine. I would close my eyes and whisper prayers, not memorized chants, not recitations in ancient tongues, but simple words from my heart. "A thank you, Jesus, for another day. Guide me. Use me." I began helping the others in the fellowship. Some were poor farmers, others widows or travelers who had found the same hope I did. Together, we cooked meals for those who had none and visited the sick who were shunned by their families. Each act of kindness felt like an offering, not to idols made of stone, but to the living God who saw every gesture of love. One afternoon, as we gathered to prepare food for a family that had lost their crops to the flood, I noticed an old man sitting at the edge of the path, staring at me. His clothes were torn, his feet bare, and his eyes sunken with hunger. I walked up to him and offered a bowl of rice. He looked at me with trembling hands and said, Why would you feed me? You don't even know me. I smiled and said, Because someone fed me when I was lost too. He took the bowl and began to eat slowly, tears forming in his eyes. Watching him, I felt an overwhelming joy, the kind that made me realize faith wasn't just something you believed, it was something you lived. In the evenings, we would gather again to sing. The voices that rose into the air were not polished or trained, but full of life. The songs spoke of freedom, mercy, and redemption. And every time I sang, I felt my old self fade further away, the girl who once feared God she didn't understand, who bowed before silence. Now, I bowed before love itself. Sometimes, memories of my village would still return, the temple bells, the cold stone floors, my mother's gentle touch. There were nights I cried for her, wondering if she ever thought of me, if she missed me. I prayed for her every night. Lord, I would whisper, open her heart as you opened mine. Let her know your peace. Then, one morning, as I was sweeping the church courtyard, a voice called my name softly. I turned, and my heart nearly stopped. It was my mother. She looked thinner, her sari faded from travel. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. Then she walked closer, her eyes searching my face. Anaya, she said, her voice trembling. They said you had gone mad, that you had forsaken the gods. But I see something different. I swallowed hard. Mother, I found peace. The kind of peace I searched for all my life. She looked around at the small church, at the people praying quietly inside. Is this where you live now? Yes, I said softly. This is where I learned that God isn't made of stone. He is living. He loves us. Tears filled her eyes. She reached out and touched my cheek. You always were different, she whispered. Even as a child, you asked too many questions. I smiled through my tears. Now, I have found the answer. She stayed that night, sleeping beside me on the floor of my small room. Before we closed our eyes, I asked if I could pray for her. She hesitated but nodded. As I prayed aloud, she wept quietly. I didn't try to explain faith to her, I simply asked Jesus to touch her heart. And in that moment, I felt something sacred between us, the beginning of a miracle I could not yet see. In the days that followed, she watched our little community. How we helped one another, how we prayed, how we lived without fear. She saw joy that couldn't be faked. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the hills, she said softly, there is something here, something real. I took her hand and said, it's him, Mother. It's always been him. Weeks turned into months, and the seasons changed. I began teaching children how to read using verses from the scriptures. Their laughter filled the courtyard, their voices echoing the same freedom that had once found me. The church grew, not in wealth or grandeur, but in love, a love that drew the broken, the forgotten, the hopeless. Sometimes, when the wind blew through the neem leaves, I would close my eyes and think of the storm, the night my life began to change. It had been violent, terrifying, and yet through it, I had heard his voice calling me out of darkness. Now, when the rains came, I no longer feared them. Instead, I would stand outside, lift my face to the sky, and whisper, you found me in the storm, Lord, and you still walk beside me. The world that once rejected me no longer held power over me. I was no longer a servant bound by duty. I was a daughter of grace, free, forgiven, and alive. And as the sun set behind the fields, painting the sky in gold and crimson, I knew that my story, the The story of a young temple girl who once bowed before idols was not just mine anymore. It belonged to the one who turned ashes into beauty, fear into faith, and a lost heart into a living testimony of his love. For the rest of my days, I vowed to tell others what I had found, not a religion, not a ritual, but a relationship with the one who met me in my brokenness and gave me a new name, a new life, and a new light. I was no longer Anaya, the servant of the shrine. I was Anaya, the child of God. And that truth, that unshakable truth, became the song of my life forever. Years passed, and life settled into a rhythm of peace and purpose. The once wounded parts of my heart had begun to heal under the gentle hands of grace. I had grown stronger, not in pride, but in quiet faith. I taught children by day, prayed with families by evening, and shared the story of how the God who created the stars had also reached into the smallness of my life. Yet even in the calm of this new life, one thought lingered: my village. The place where my journey began, where I had once been cast out. For a long time, I avoided the thought of returning. The memories were heavy, and the pain still felt fresh at times. But as the months turned into years, I began to sense a soft tug in my heart, a whisper urging me to go back, not to reclaim what I lost, but to share what I had found. One morning, while reading scripture under the neem tree, I came across the verse, "Go home to your people and tell them how much the Lord has done for you, and how he has had mercy on you." The words pierced me deeply. I knew they were not just words, they were a call. I packed a small cloth bag once again, the same way I had years ago when I left the village in tears. But this time, I did not leave in fear or shame. I left in love. My mother, now living with me, placed her hand on mine. "You are ready," as she said softly, "and I will go with you." The journey took us 2 days. The road was familiar yet strange. The same trees, the same hills, but everything looked different through the eyes of faith. When we reached the edge of the village, I stopped and stood quietly for a long time. My heart pounded, not in fear, but in a mixture of sorrow and hope. The temple bells still rang in the distance, echoing across the fields. The same sound that once ruled my life now felt like a faint memory of who I used to be. The people looked the same. The farmers tending their crops, the women carrying pots of water, yet to me, everything had changed. When I stepped onto the main path, heads began to turn. Whispers followed us, just as they had the day I left. But this time, I walked with my head held high, not in defiance, but in peace. An elderly villager approached me cautiously. "Is it really you, Anaya?" he asked, his voice uncertain. "Yes," I said with a gentle smile. "It is me." He looked confused. "You should not have returned. They said you turned your back on the goddess. Why would you come back now?" "Because I found the truth," I replied softly. "And the truth has brought me here, not to condemn, but to share love." Word spread quickly. Before long, a small crowd had gathered. Some were curious, others wary. Then, the head priest appeared, older now, his hair streaked with grey, his eyes still sharp but weary. He looked at me in silence, as though studying a ghost. "You have some courage," he said finally. "After all these years, you dare to return?" "I didn't come to argue," I said calmly. "I came to tell you what happened after you cast me out. I came to tell you that the God I found is alive, and he loves even those who hate him." A murmur rippled through the crowd. The priest frowned. "Blasphemy still," he muttered. "Your words bring danger, girl. Leave before you stir trouble again." But before I could respond, a voice spoke up from behind the crowd. It was a woman, her hair streaked with silver, her face lined with sorrow. "Let her speak," Ishi said. "I want to hear her." It was my childhood friend, Mira. The priest hesitated but stepped aside. So I began to speak, not with anger or pride, but with tenderness. I told them about the night of the storm, the vision of the man in white, the peace that filled my heart, the rejection I faced, and the new life I found. I spoke not to convince them, but to bear witness. At first, there was silence. Then a few began to murmur again, uncertain and restless. But I noticed Mira wiping her eyes, and an old man in the back whispering softly, "Could it be true?" I took a step closer. "I once feared your gods," I said. "I once believed I needed to please them with endless rituals. But now, I know there is a God who does not demand for me what I cannot give. Instead, he gave himself for me. I was blind, but he gave me sight. I was lost, but he found me." The priest's expression softened slightly. He looked down, his lips pressed tightly together. I could see conflict in his eyes, anger and confusion wrestling with something deeper, something that looked like curiosity. After a long pause, he said, "Aaron, what has this God done for you, that you speak with such certainty?" I smiled gently. "He gave me peace that does not leave. He gave me forgiveness when I deserved none. And he gave me love that even your curses could not take away." The crowd fell silent again. The wind rustled through the trees, and for a moment, even the temple bells seemed to pause. Then, something unexpected happened. The priest turned slowly toward the idol behind him, the same idol I had once served with trembling hands. He stared at it for a long moment, then turned back to me. "Go," he said finally, his voice low. "Go in peace. Perhaps, or your God is with you." I bowed slightly, not in worship, but in respect. "He is," I said softly. "And he is with you too, if only you call upon him." As my mother and I walked away, I could hear murmurs of discussion behind us, not mockery this time, but curiosity. A few followed us quietly as we left the square, asking questions about this Jesus I spoke of. That night, we stayed in a small hut at the edge of the village. As I lay down, the stars above seemed brighter than ever. I thought of all that had happened, the rejection, the wandering, the encounter, and now this moment of peace. The village that once cast me out had now heard his name. Even if only one heart had been touched, I knew it was enough. For I had not returned to win arguments or prove myself right. I had returned to let his light shine where my story began. And as I whispered my final prayer before sleep, I felt his presence close once more, the same gentle voice that had first called me through the storm. "You were faithful, my child. The seed has been planted. Leave the rest to me." I smiled through tears and whispered, "A yes, Lord." The next morning, the temple bells rang again, but this time, they no longer sounded like chains. They sounded like echoes of a past redeemed. And as the sun rose over the village I once feared, I knew I had truly come home. The morning after my return felt strangely peaceful. The same village that once echoed with judgment and whispers now hummed with curiosity. People no longer looked at me with anger or disgust, but with uncertainty, as if trying to understand the quiet strength that now guided my steps. I could feel the difference in the air. Something unseen was stirring, a change beginning to take root in hearts long bound by fear. Mother and I stayed in the small hut by the river, the same river where I once washed temple lamps in my younger days. Now, the waters seemed purer, brighter, not because they had changed, but because my eyes had. I spent the early hours sitting by the bank, praying softly, asking the Lord to open eyes and hearts as he once opened mine. That afternoon, a young boy came running to our hut. He was breathless, his small hands trembling. Anaya, he cried, my sister is dying. Please, come. I stood quickly. What happened? She has been sick for days, he said, his eyes wide with fear. The priest gave her offerings to make, but she only grew weaker. My mother said, maybe your God can help. My heart raced. For a moment, doubt tried to whisper, who am I to help? But then I remembered the words I had heard in prayer so many times, you are mine. I am with you. I took the boy's hand and followed him through the narrow paths back toward the heart of the village. People watched as we passed, whispering softly, some even following behind. When we reached the hut, I saw a little girl lying on a mat, her face pale, her breathing shallow. Her mother knelt beside her, tears streaming down her face. When she saw me, she hesitated. They say you pray to another God, as she said quietly. But the priest has done all he can. If your God is real, please, ask him to help her. I knelt beside the child, feeling the weight of every eye upon me. I wasn't sure what to say or do, only that I must trust him. I took the girl's fragile hand and closed my eyes. Lord Jesus, I whispered, you are the giver of life. You healed me when I was broken, and you found me when I was lost. Please, touch this child now. Let them see your mercy. The hut was silent. The air was thick with tension and hope. Then, slowly, the child's breathing steadied. Her lips moved faintly. Water, as she whispered. Her mother gasped. The boy ran to fetch a cup. The girl sat up weakly, blinking as though waking from a deep dream. The mother fell to her knees, sobbing uncontrollably. She lives, as she cried. Your God heard us. The onlookers murmured in awe. Some fell silent, others began to weep. I felt tears fill my own eyes, not from pride, but from the overwhelming presence of God filling that small hut. I knew this was not my doing, it was His. Word spread quickly through the village. By evening, many gathered outside to see the child, now awake and smiling faintly in her mother's arms. Some came forward shyly, asking me to pray for their sick loved ones, for their worries, for peace. I did not refuse anyone. We prayed together, not with incense, not with chants, but with hearts laid bare. That night, as the moonlight bathed the village in silver, the same priest who had once cast me out came to the hut. His expression was unreadable. For a long moment, he stood at the doorway in silence, then said quietly, I saw the girl. What happened today? I cannot explain. It was not me, I said softly. It was the Lord. The same God who came to me in the storm. He looked at me long and hard, then stepped closer. Tell me, he said, this Jesus, who is he, really? So I told him everything, the storm, the vision, the peace that never left me, the love that freed me from fear. As I spoke, I could see the hardness in his eyes beginning to melt. When I finished, he sat in silence, his gaze fixed on the ground. Finally, he whispered, all my life, I've served gods of stone. But I've never felt what I feel now. Tears welled in my eyes. That is him, I said softly. He is not far. Just call his name. The priest looked up slowly and whispered, Jesus. His voice trembled, but the sound of it filled the air like the breaking of chains. That night, he stayed with us until dawn, asking questions, listening, and finally praying with us. When the first light touched the village, he looked at me and said, I have seen the truth today. The next day, the temple bells rang as always, but this time, their sound carried something new, a tone of surrender, not duty. Some said the priest himself went inside and removed the offerings, leaving the altar bare. Others said he sat quietly outside, staring at the sky as though seeing it for the first time. For me, it was not about the miracle or the priest's change. It was about the revelation that redemption wasn't just for me. It was for them too. The same mercy that found me in exile had now entered the very place of my pain. The circle was complete. As the sun rose high above the temple roof, I stood once again at the edge of the village and whispered, Lord, you have done what I never could. You have turned rejection into redemption, and shame into testimony. In that moment, the truth was clear. Faith was never meant to stay hidden in the heart. It was meant to return, to heal, to redeem. I looked at the faces around me, the healed child, the weeping mother, even the humbled priest, and I saw the reflection of his grace shining through each one. That day, my heart understood something new. Revelation is not found in visions or miracles alone, but in the quiet transformation of hearts once closed to love. And as I walked down the same road I had once taken in exile, I smiled, knowing that the journey which began in rejection had ended in redemption, not just for me, but for an entire village that had at last glimpsed the face of the living God. The sun dipped low over the horizon, painting the village in gold and crimson. The wind moved softly through the palm trees, carrying the scent of evening fires and the quiet hum of life. I stood at the edge of the village square, where the old stone temple rose in silence, the same place where my journey had begun, and where it would now end. Once, this temple had filled me with fear. I had walked its halls trembling, believing that holiness lived only within stone walls and that the God's approval had to be earned. Now, as I looked upon it, I felt no fear, only compassion. Its carvings were cracked, its paint faded, yet in its stillness, I saw a reflection of my own past, broken but waiting to be made new. Villagers began to gather again, their faces calm, their eyes gentle. Children ran barefoot, laughing, their joy echoing through the courtyard. The once hostile stares had turned into warm smiles. The air no longer carried suspicion, but peace. In their hearts, something had changed, something deeper than words could express. The priest, now humble and quiet, walked toward me. He held no offerings in his hands this time, only a simple clay lamp. He placed it on the ground between us and said softly, We have worshipped idols for years, but none of them ever lit a flame in our hearts. Now, I understand what you meant. We were the temple all along. Tears filled my eyes as I nodded. Yes, I whispered. The living God does not dwell in stone or shadow. He lives in us. We are his temple, his living temple. At that moment, the villagers began lighting lamps around the courtyard. One by one, flames flickered to life, dancing gently in the night breeze. Soon, the entire temple was surrounded by light, not from rituals or offerings, but from simple clay lamps held by men, women, and children whose hearts had been touched by grace. The scene glowed like a sea of stars come down to rest on earth. I looked around and saw faces once hardened by tradition now softened by joy. The mother of the healed girl stood beside me, her child holding a lamp with steady hands. The old priest watched with tears running freely down his cheeks. It was as if heaven itself was breathing through that moment. Then, from somewhere among the crowd, a voice began to sing, not a temple chant, not a ritual hymn, but a new song. It was soft, trembling at first, but others joined in until the whole village was singing. Their words were simple, spontaneous, and full of awe. The light has come. The darkness is gone. Our hearts are his dwelling. We are his own. I felt my knees weaken as emotion swept through me. I lifted my face to the sky, and for the first time in years, I saw not the fading sun, but the eternal light that burned beyond it, steady, patient, alive. It was then that I realized the greatest miracle was not the storm or the healing. It was this, a people reborn, their hearts awakened, their fears turned into faith. The living God had turned a village of worshippers into worship itself. As the song filled the night, I closed my eyes and prayed silently, a thank you, Lord. You turned my exile into purpose, my pain into testimony, and this village into your sanctuary. When I opened my eyes again, the temple doors stood open. The lamp's golden glow spilled inside, chasing away every shadow. The stone idols were gone, replaced by the laughter of children and the sound of worship rising like incense. I stepped forward and placed my hand on the cool stone of the doorway. You are no longer a house of silence, ere I whispered, smiling through my tears. Now, you echo with life. The wind rose gently, carrying the sound of the villagers' song far into the night, over the fields, the river, the hills beyond. It was a sound of freedom, of hearts reborn. And as I turned away, walking toward the same riverbank where my journey had once begun, I felt the quiet voice within me say, "This is my temple, not made by hands, but by hearts that believe." I stopped and looked back one last time. The temple glowed softly under the night sky, alive with light and song. It was no longer a monument of stone, but a living testimony, proof that even the darkest places can shine again. I smiled, lifted my lamp high, and whispered, "At the living temple or lives within us." And with that, the screen of my story faded to dawn, not an ending, but a beginning.